Hello, everyone, and welcome back to FoE Talk Week 5. As always, I'm your host, Isaiah Jacobs, and I am joined here by a very special guest. He joins me all the way from Scotland. His name is Fuzzy. He writes marking number 7.
All right, hey, up.
Hey, Fuzzy, thank you so much for joining me this week. It is an absolute pleasure having you on. I've been wanting you on since like the first episode because, oh my God, it's Fuzzy, and everyone likes Fuzzy and Murky number 7.
Oh well, I mean, I would absolutely love to think that everyone likes there. It's had its fair share of downside as well, but yeah, it's great to be here for it. I've been following it since the first episode, and did one a while ago. It was great fun. I'd always kind of looked forward to doing another.
Well, I'm
Here it
glad to
is.
have you. I'm glad that you listened to it and that you like it. But uh, before we get started off with any actual topics, I just wanted to say last week's topic was about characters, and I asked you and the other guys in our Skype group about characters, and you had something to say in regards to characters being balanced, and that you believe that it stems from internet original character communities being ostensibly born out of role-playing communities. And, quote, they are OP is an absolute nonsense critique of a character in my eyes, end quote.
Yeah, and I absolutely stick by that. I'm not even going to try and say, oh, I was meaning this. No, I'm going to stick absolutely to what I
Alright.
said.
Okay, yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, because I suppose now that I've got an opportunity to further explain that, is
Yes.
what I see that is extending through when I think about characters being balanced or not, is many people look at a character, and in many cases, if they say that character is OP or not balanced or straight overpowered, a lot of that comes out from groups that were very used to thinking of characters operating in a sense of everyone involved in the group brings their own character and then they tell the story together. Or it's about, oh, hey, my character can share art with your character. And people generally tend to not prefer characters to overshadow one another when it's between different people. Whereas in an actual story, where it's written, where all the characters are coming from one person, in that sort of environment, characters are going to overshadow other characters. Some characters are going to have a larger role in the story. And as part of that, some characters, to drive the story, may be a lot more, and I hate to use almost the term that refers more to fighting, but in general, more powerful as a character. For example, you know, if I was to take my own one for it, Brimstone Blitz is an exceptionally powerful character that in many ways, if he was a protagonist, people would often say, oh, overpowered. But the reality is that his presence is to offset many other things in the story that couldn't come up to that level. That he's a character whose presence and whose backstory has that reliability of being someone who is that intimidating, someone who is that powerful, because it then permits the personality in his own story to really come through. And it can even go through to if you're watching old 80s action movies. Nobody is going to watch an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and say that it's not entertaining because the guy is overpowered, running through an island, spraying 90 degrees to the left of his target, and yet somehow still hitting it. Nobody's going to really complain about that who isn't K. So the rest of them are, looking at, and that to me is in many ways what I mean when I say it doesn't matter how powerful a character is, it's about the story that that character's framed in and whether there's a reason for that or not. So to my eyes, how powerful a character is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the story surrounding that character and whether or not that character fits in that story tone-wise. And how powerful they are is only a very small element of that. Whether their personality fits, whether their appearance fits, whether their backstory fits, whether the way that they're written and where they think is fitting in, how combat capable they are is an exceptionally minor point to that and is entirely irrelevant, I feel, to how someone should judge a story by simply saying a character is extremely powerful. Maybe the story is set up to completely permit that. Look at the God of War games. Kratos is
Yeah.
ridiculously overpowered,
Yeah.
but that's the point. That's what people play them for. And I think it's a little dismissive people to just throw down on a powerful character because they are powerful, as opposed to throwing down on a bad character because they don't match their setting and what the story is trying to show.
All right. Now, okay, you mentioned that Brimstone was there to sort of balance out other characters that couldn't reach that level. Would you say that Brimstone is supposed to balance out Murky's, would you say, underpowered character?
I kind of go in the same way. I dislike overpowered and underpowered as general terms for characters, but what Brimstone brings is a sense of uh, protectiveness, is a sense of reassurance that if he's in the area, his service in the story is to make the reader feel a little more at ease at times, because it's very easy for a character like Murky in a story like Murky Number 7 to have such a lot of scenes where the reader should be feeling afraid for him, because it feels like if anyone in the area decided to have a problem with him, then that would be a major issue. There's a certain stress level. Anytime he's standing beside Brimstone Blitz, that goes away. At least that's the intent for me as a writer. That if he's standing beside him, the reader is no longer going to have that constant stress with them, because they know he's standing beside an extremely powerful, extremely protective character who isn't going to allow that to happen. So to me, that's the role in the story, is not only just to offset when it comes to the action sequences, but also to provide a certain level of stress reduction for the reader. I think what you're aiming at is that you're just saying that some people have critiques of certain stories regarding characters that perhaps grow into a way that the reader did not necessarily expect they would, and whether they feel that that is gradually taking the story away from the tone that they expected.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think with that, I think that's generally more a critique, not referencing any particular story, because I haven't read as far as that in it, so I can't possibly critique it because I don't know. So I'm not referring to any in particular. But in a story that someone's critique is that a character slowly becomes too off kilter from I'm not entirely sure if that's a Scottish saying or not, off kilter. So it becomes a little bit frayed away from the original tone of the story. That I just see as, in a story where it doesn't work, that's more just that the story and its themes are starting to lose track of their scope more than anything else.
It becomes inconsistent, to say.
Yeah, I just see it. It's in the same way that if I took Marker Number 7 as a story, not the character name, too far away from Philadelphia and started having the later chapters set near the Everfree Forest for something, that would lose a lot of the scope of the story, which relies very much on the sense of wanting to get away from a certain area. If I took them away from that, it removes that scope, it removes that major theme, and that to me would create a sense of dissonance with it. And I think what a lot of people feel when they say if a character becomes slowly more powerful, the type of the story, beyond what the story seems to imply and what the world seems set up to permit, then I see that as the scope of the story changing rather than it being necessarily just about the character's level, and that the rest of the story has not moved to meet it, or hasn't built up the rest of the story to meet it.
And what about in the opposite direction, where everything just becomes so overblown, where the character becomes overpowered, and then the story does rise up to meet it? That also, to me, strikes it as becoming a tonal, losing focus, becoming inconsistent, where it started off simple and then it just grew to just too epic proportions.
It absolutely can happen. I mean, I don't know if you've played. Well, I suppose over in the States it would have been called Indigo. Something Indigo. It was called Fahrenheit over here. It was the one that
Indigo
predated
Prophecy in the States.
Indigo Prophecy. That's the one.
But then when the
yeah.
remaster came out, it did get renamed to Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So if you've played that, I'm not going to go too in depth with it, because some people, if there's a remaster, some people might not have played it. So I won't talk about what happens. But towards the third act of that story, the entire thing seems to change in many ways, and a lot of stuff happens that the first two acts never even approached. And those who have played it know exactly what I'm talking about. Those who haven't played it, you probably should, because it's still worth playing. So I'm not even going to dare tell you what this is about. But there's a very significant tonal shift in the third act, and it's probably one of the weakest points of the game because of it, because it completely changes its focus away from what it was and puts the focus on something else entirely that feels like it was almost directed by a totally different person. And yeah, it can be a very dramatic shift like that. And I think it all just comes down to just how that build into it is done and whether there's enough hints of it early on. I always say that stories should almost connect with the ending from chapter one, essentially. And if there's not enough hints that that's where it's going to go, I just see that as not having informed your readers that about what this story is going to do, about where it's going to go. The first chapter in general should always give the reader an indication of maybe
Right.
where this thing could build up to. Tell them what the ceiling is going to be. In some cases, yeah, you could break that ceiling to give them a little shock, but in overall, you don't want to have it going to places that they probably didn't expect it to, and then keep going.
You need to establish that tone and then keep that tone throughout.
Yeah,
For the most part.
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things. Like anytime I've done a few talks at cons now about writing, and that's one of the things I always bring up to people, especially to a lot of the kids who come along to it, which is great. That's probably my favorite part, actually, getting to get a lot of them into writing in the first place. And that's the big thing I always tell them: so is know the ending before you even write the first word. If you know the ending, you know the scope it's got to go to at the story's biggest moment, right at the end, then that's going to help keep you underneath that ceiling, and it's going to help you set up to that a lot better. So I'd say in many cases that it tends to emerge from stories that maybe haven't planned where they're going too much, that haven't decided what their climactic height is going to be. So if they don't have that knowledge of where their ceiling is, then it's very easy to go past it.
Now, you touched on planning, and this is a subject that I got a lot of suggestions for topics and questions based on a sort of survey I sent out this past week. And I want to get into that in just a minute here, but to switch topics on Indigo Prophecy real quick, it's interesting that you brought that up because I just read, I believe it was an article or a thread somewhere about that, how like the beginning of the game started great, how it sort of starts as this supernatural murder mystery,
Yeah.
and the beginning of the game starts in this diner and everyone praises the beginning, but after that the game just sort of like shits itself along the way.
There's a very specific moment in the third act is the closest I'll say to exactly
Yeah.
what happens, but suffice to say it completely shifts away from being that borderline supernatural murder mystery and becomes something very, very different that's very reflective of the early 2000s and what mostly every movie was
Yeah.
doing at the time.
I never played Indigo Prophecy myself. I wanted to because there was so much coverage on the beginning segment of that game that
Yeah.
I think drew a lot of people in, but I am mostly aware of what happens after that and how, as you say, it just shifts a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So I know what you're talking about. Would you say that this sort of goes into poor planning for the story? How it seems like it's sort of it's something that a lot of people criticize Full Metal Jacket for, where the first act is very different from the rest of the movie. I forget the proper term for it right now, but atonal, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. I've only seen the first few episodes of Brotherhood, so that's really my only experience with Full Metal Jacket. But if it ends up
No, no, no,
shifting
no.
away from
I'm
that.
talking about the Stanley Kubrick film.
Oh, sorry. Did you say Full? Oh, sorry. I for some reason I thought you said Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I meant
right.
Full Metal Jacket, the film.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm very familiar with that one. Yeah. Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that sort of dissonance, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But in that regard, it was purposeful. But I digress. So you talk a lot about planning the story. Are you a fan of George R.R. Martin by chance?
I have watched Game of Thrones the series. I've not read any of the books. I only actually watched the series 1 to 4, I should say, just earlier this year. It was the first I've actually seen it. I cannot say for certain how much I know, how far he's really gotten with things, and how. I mean, watching the series, it's hard to tell because the series knew where a lot of those things was going to be when it was being made. So I don't know if some of that was retroactively put in to set things up early in advance. So I don't know if novels maybe the wrong word, if the books themselves actually set all that up or not.
Right. I bring George R. R. Martin up because he has a quote in regards to writing that I wanted to talk to you about, and
Yeah.
that there are two types of writers. There's the architect and the gardener. The architect knows exactly what a story is going to be. He's already planned out everything before he's even written the first word. With the gardener, he has a vague idea of how the story will unfold. He knows the general shape of what it's going to look like in the end, but he allows the story to grow and mold on its own. It will take branches that the author wouldn't really know. So what are you in regards to Murky Number 7? Are you an architect or are you a gardener in terms of planning?
Absolutely shift towards architect. Absolutely. I had chapters 1 to 18 planned out effectively to the scene before I even wrote the first word of chapter 1, basically. To give an idea, that's those of you who were with the story since the beginning know how long that is. That's a period of a good number of years. So, yeah, I would not be able to say anything except architect there. But the thing I found interesting between both architect and garden there is both of them in your specifications had a note that they both knew where the end was.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Like,
sure.
oh,
Yeah.
and like I said, that's always the big goal for me. Know what the end is, and that's how you can build anything up around it.
Now, what makes you want to plan everything out to the last detail in your writing instead of just allowing the story to flow organically?
The reason I do that is because I'm a huge fan of circular themes in writing, in that whenever something is set up early on, I really prefer it to have some sort of impact down the line. And I don't just mean twists based on something that has been hinted at in an early chapter. I mean down to very subtle bookends, down to dialogue that maybe a different character repeats that has meaning because that other character said it. I really like to have those planned out in my head so that I know and remember to have them when the time comes. And it effectively gives me that library of things that I know that have a point to build up down there. And the other big reason that I fall into that is simply because I really worry about filler and I worry about a story beginning to waffle, particularly within the kind of Fallout Equestria community, where that was one of the two things that I noticed a lot of people generally complaining about with stories, is that middle part when they start to sag. Disclaimer, I actually think that Murky Number 7 sags in the middle. I didn't entirely avoid it, which I actually see almost as more of a reason as to why I was happy that I did actually try to plan it out. I didn't rely on things starting to go a little bit slow paced in the middle because they ended up doing so anyway. It could have been a lot worse. And for planning, I just really like to know where I'm going. I like to be able to say, right, what big scenes have got to do? Where am I going to put it? Right, there's this gap of chapter. What content has this chapter got? It's got none. Right, toss it. And okay, bring in these other scenes that need to be there. Oh, I can put these two scenes in the same chapter. And it's essentially like building blocks to me. It's like making something out of Lego, just nothing to stand on. So you'd get it all together and just form it up, and you can look at your plan. You can use an Excel sheet. I used like a giant bit of paper that I put up on the wall. I wish I still had it. And that's honestly a big bit of paper. Fantastic bit of tool. And I could really just have a note on columns for the chapters and say, right, this chapter, this scene, this scene, this scene. Right, that's the major scenes for the story. And I can say, right, there's none of those columns look very empty. And that to me is a good sign. Okay, that's it. That's something I've got well planned. There's always going to be something happening, something advancing each chapter. So, yeah, I mean, I think even talking about that sort of planning makes it very clear that I just very much like to have things organized.
I want to play devil's advocate here, and I want to argue for the sake of being a gardener of a writer, which is what George R. R. Martin identifies himself as.
Yeah.
I also haven't read Game of Thrones, but I can tell that there is a lot of shit going on. I know that the book sort of transitions between different perspectives, between different characters.
Well, I can barely keep up with the TV series,
Oh,
and
yeah.
apparently it streamlines it. You know,
Yeah.
I was having to turn to my friend and keep asking her, like, who's that again? Like, am I meant to be rooting for him? And then she reminded me I'm not meant to be rooting for anyone, apparently, in this story.
Oh, please, you're supposed to be rooting at least for Peter Dinklage and Daenerys. At least those two characters. Those, well, mostly Peter Dinklage's character, not really anyone else.
I
Uh,
mostly rooted for his acting, I guess. There was
yeah,
that.
yeah. And also Arya. Also
Yeah,
Arya.
well, yeah, I mean, well, it just came to me as like for the longest period, everyone I got behind died. So I think I was sort of gradually weaned out of this idea of ever having hope.
Yeah, it's sort of like, why should I even bother just empathizing with any of these characters? Everyone's probably gonna die anyway. So I
Yeah.
definitely don't blame you there. But in terms of writing, I also see myself as a gardener of a writer where I'll have this outline of an idea of a story I want to do. I'm like, okay, and I roughly know how it ends. Again, you got to know the ending of the story at least.
Yeah.
But it's like you can plan and you can detail everything out, but there's also a charm in just the story taking on a life of its own as you write it. But I think that also comes down to like you gotta stay consistent. You gotta if you're not gonna plan out the plot, you need to at least know what you're going to do with your characters. And it seems like if you're going to write your story like a garden, you need to have solid characters. You need to have just know them.
Yeah, I'd
'Cause
say
there needs
like
to be
doing
something that needs to be planned out.
yeah, I think doing that sort of thing it would really be incredible. I've written like that before. I didn't enjoy it very much, but I can certainly see why some people would find the appeal. To me, with that, I'd say people would really have to have a grand grasp of just how their characters would react and how their world is built up. They almost have to create a sandbox for themselves. Is how I would say with that.
It almost seems to suggest that it is a very heavily character-driven story.
In many ways, yeah.
Yeah.
I think if people are going to be sticking with a story that doesn't necessarily have a very singular driving narrative, then chances are they're going to be around there for the characters. You can see a lot of that emerging from, strangely enough, webcomics.
Oh yeah.
90% of webcomics people stick with is because they find the characters funny or endearing or they find them cute or just generally wacky to watch, and it's the characters that keep them around because very few webcomics ever really go anywhere.
There are two Fallout Equestria stories that I think do this very well. The first of them being The Things We've Handed Down, written by Date.
Yeah?
That story was originally written as a contest last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And each chapter was written based on the theme of the week. So when Date was first writing the story, he had no idea what story or what direction the story was going to go in. All he had was the main character, Leaky Fawcett, who was meant to be this very weak, underpowered character thrown into this wasteland. And beyond that, Date didn't know where it was going to go, but it has worked out very well for him so far, and it all has to do with the character Leaky Fawcett. It's because of how endearing she is. You feel bad for her because she has no skills. She's very ignorant of everything around her, and yet the situation she's thrown in and how she reacts to them makes for a very entertaining story. I'm not sure if you've read the things
I
You've Handed
can't
Down
say I
yet.
have. No, does it have has it, or rather, I should say, over the time it's been releasing these chapters, has it built up a sense of a main story developing? Did he feel
It
that
has,
started to
yes.
occur? So
Yeah.
that started to occur naturally as it's
Yes.
going.
Yep, and that's an example of how treating your story like a garden can work out for you, but there is some danger because you can write by the seat of your pants, but eventually you're going to have to have some sort of central narrative to keep interest, and that's what happens in webcomics where there are arcs.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason that I kind of drifted away from doing the gardening style was I've met a lot of writers over the time, not just from Fallout Equestria, from many other places, and one of the most common things I always hear is that they can start doing a story, but then as soon as you hit that end of Act 1 towards Act 2 period, that's the area that the vast majority seem to drop away from it. And that's the same with me. part of why I started writing Marker Number 7 was to prove to myself that I could finish a project for once in my life. I had done years and years of always starting something, getting a wee bit into it, and then just never continuing it. And almost all the time, that was because I hit a point where I would be thinking, right, what am I going to do in the next chapter? And eventually I just thought to myself, oh my God, no, I can't be thinking that. How can I be writing a grander story if I'm literally coming to the start of a chapter and think to myself, what am I going to have happen in this one? And it always feels like it's pushing away the next big scene. So I think if someone's going to be doing gardening, I think like it's amazing how this has created a certain sense of, a certain oh, you're gonna do gardening now, and everyone's gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. Podcasts are weird.
Are, yeah.
So
Don't do them.
oh yeah, I'll just take your word for it. Aye. So if someone's gonna be doing gardening for it, then I really think that it's gonna take a huge amount of discipline from themselves to be able to still be thinking enough ahead that they know where they're going to go and what they're going to do next. Because that moment of sitting thinking, what am I going to do now, is in my experience the death of the story.
Oh yeah.
Is the point where motivation starts to drop down because you're never quite sure what you're doing, and writing blind is the worst feeling. And I think maybe the way I would at least say, though, between architect and gardener, is I would just regard that as long-term planning versus short-term planning in a way, and neither is necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Short-term planning can be more flexible, whereas long-term planning can be a bit more reliable. It's the same way businesses work in many ways, or how a manufacturing process would go. So yeah, I just see that as two different methods there, but that's what I would say it comes down to. I think so long as someone can avoid getting to that point where they are just sitting there not knowing what to do, then I think either way, different writers could certainly get on there. I mean, for goodness sake, look at Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
No one can look at a guy who says he writes that way and then say, oh, well, that's not going to work. So no, they both seem totally legitimate.
Was this a problem you had in regards to how you feel the middle of Murky Number 7 drags?
I feel that predominantly suffered from a period when, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to sort of explain this without requiring to say things that I can't. And I think the best way I can maybe put it as, when I hit around chapter 14, there was a large section of my planning. Like I said, I'd planned up to chapter 18 before I even started writing. But chapters, I believe it was 13 to 15, and that became 14 to 16 because I added a chapter around 11 or 12. Once I hit that point, there was a large section of that initial plan that I looked at, and I realized that as much as I thought it had big things going on, there was a much more efficient way to do it. So I stripped that out and I made a more efficient way, and that set up things to be vastly better down the line. But what I was left with was a structure that still needed a good number of events, and I didn't think about the consequences, I think, of how to fill those gaps in. So I would say this is perhaps the downside of the architect a little, is that once something is so rigidly planned that it has to happen to make any sense, if a logic error happens, it can sometimes force you down a road you don't want to do, because you've had it preset, you know it has to be done this way, and if you do it another way, then chances are it's going to break it. Sometimes you'll think of a better idea and it'll solve it. That happens quite a lot. But in this case, either I was still too inexperienced at the time, or I perhaps thought better of it than I ended up doing in hindsight, but it ended up essentially creating 3 very slow-paced chapters, one of which, especially in the middle, never really advanced anything as much as I thought it would. So that kind of sag in the middle unfortunately coincided with the low point of the story, the part where the characters are at their lowest, when the story is at its darkest, just before the eventual rise back up. And those two things together introduced a certain element of apathy, I think, to many of the readers, not helped by the fact that there was about an 8-month delay between 15 and 16. So really that was just a gigantic, just flustercuck of complete of complete messing up in that one area. And yeah, there's a lot of things that could have gone better there. And I think that part of it came down to overly strict planning that felt that the bottom fell out of it, and part of it came down to the fact that I didn't even notice that the bottom was falling out of it until it was too late.
Was this planning, this strict planning, in any way tied to trying to stay faithful to the original story, or did you allow yourself to sort of borrow that scene in Philadelphia as a base point, and then you gave yourself the freedom to explore in the sandbox? Were you restricting yourself, or did you give yourself freedom when writing
Oh,
Market
I,
Number Seven?
oh, I had quite a lot of freedom. There's quite a lot of things about the if someone rereads chapters, I think it was 25 and 26 in the original story. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Or was it 20? No, it was 25 and 26.
Yes.
If someone rereads those chapters after having read Marky and are quite aware of it, chances are they're going to go, "Oh my God, Marky really broke canon here." And I did. I actually knowingly did a good number of times. I changed quite a lot. Yeah, if someone was to reread chapters 25 and 26, the original, they'd notice that quite a lot of the canon breaks from Marky Number 7, and that's absolutely intentional. In some cases, it was because I felt that I needed a bit more room to work with. For example, in the original, it's pretty much implied that the Alpha Omega Hotel with the foals in it is effectively across the street from the Fun Farm, which was basically where all the slaves were. And that it didn't really work in a sense of always having the foals right in the area of where the slaves were going to start off the story. So that in Market Number 7 is in the same region, but it's notably further apart. So it's in many ways I like to think I just kind of stretched Philadelphia a little rather than switched it all around, because when you really think about it, Pip didn't actually see a lot of the city. She really just went straight into the Fun Farm, maybe one building outside it,
Boom,
and then
boom, boom, boom.
yeah, and then the pit.
Yep.
So, and all of that was effectively in the area of the Fun Farm. So everything outside that I had free reign with. But there were even things later on. People have noticed that in the recent chapters, during the Enclave attack on Philadelphia, there are a number of missing elements from the canon story. They'll have noticed that the dragon, the cyber dragon, is nowhere to be seen. And they say, well, how on earth would they not notice them? And I say, well, the reason they don't notice them is I removed them. And the reason simply was that there's absolutely no basis for giant dragons in the story of Marking Number 7. It's, like we were saying earlier, it's way beyond the tonal point of it.
Right.
It's not in the same sort of scope as the story. If they saw a dragon, holy crap, it's a dragon! It's a freaking cyber dragon! What the hell is going on here? It would throw the entire scene off because, oh my god, it's a freaking cyber dragon. Even if they're only just seeing it flying over top. So I just removed it. There was no need for it to be there. If someone really wants, they can just pretend that they never saw it and it was in the sky somewhere else. You know, if someone really wants to, they can pretend that. But essentially, I just removed it because I didn't feel it was necessary. And it's the same thing as when they're near the wall. I will just say when they're near the wall at one point, that during a sequence, they don't see lion or mouse. Lionheart, I should say. Lionheart or mouse. Simply for the same reason. They didn't need to be there. They've got no relevance to the story of Murky. So it's just another one of those hand-waved. Maybe they just missed them. But even though they're in very much the same area as they should be at one point, they don't see them. They don't turn up. And they're not even vaguely referred to. And that's just simply because, yeah, something had been written into that area, but it just wasn't necessary, and it would throw things off far too much. It wasn't relevant to Murky, so it doesn't get mentioned. There's been a couple of people who look at that and disagree. They say it should always stick 100% to canon and refer to the big events that happen like that, but personally, I don't really think it's necessary in that regard. If it's not going to help this story as a story, yeah, I just got rid of it.
I have noticed that does seem to be a difficult balancing act for authors, where you have this field of thought that you have to stay completely strictly canon to Fallout Equestria. That is the Bible. You cannot stray from it at all. You need to strictly adhere to it. And then there is also the other end of the spectrum where people want to have freedom, like you said, but there's also that trouble of having that freedom while also staying within the bounds of it feeling like a Fallout Equestria story. where sometimes it will veer away too much and it becomes something else entirely. But you also want to be able to still have that tone of Fallout Equestria. But you don't want to limit yourself too much. I've noticed that's a very difficult balancing act for authors to achieve sometimes.
Yeah,
Would
I
you
think
say
a lot
so?
of the time, I think a lot of the time it's just a matter of knowing your story, knowing what your story's themes are, knowing what your story's scope is, and then if it fits into that, then go for it, and just ensure it doesn't distract from it. Because at the end of the day, your story is your story. You've got to tell. You can't just start telling the originals thing again throughout it.
Oh yeah.
Even stories that are linked or possibly even go a bit off the rails. Like, I've not read it, but I've heard that Anywhere But Here does that a little bit. Stories like that are going to be connecting in some way with the original for it. Just almost think of the original as a supporting act in some ways, something that shouldn't be required to be understood to get there.
Yeah, you're of the opinion that a Fallout Equestria story should be mostly self-contained. That a reading of the original isn't necessarily required.
I'm not entirely sure if I'd go so much far because there's only so many times that the vast majority of readers who will have read the original are willing to read about the same descriptions and the same realizations over and over and over
Yeah.
again. Nobody really needs to go into the history of Equestria and what happened a second time. And to me, that just comes down to market knowledge. Like in strict theory, yes, a good story shouldn't require the original to read it, but in practical theory, 99% of your readers are going to have read it. So you've got to bear that target market in mind, that they understand. They know the scope. They don't need to have all that explained to them again. So
There's no need to go over how pip-ups work. There's no need to go over how stables came to be, things like that.
no, indeed. But if someone wants to explain why you pull a damn train with two horses, include the train car, then I am totally open to a side story explaining that one to me.
Mm-hmm. Using trains that use coal that doesn't even exist in Equestria. Okay.
Yeah, I get the feeling. I mean, well, clearly it was a bit of a running gag for it,
Yeah.
and I'd say it'd be silly if I didn't plan some of that myself.
Yeah.
Safety railings. People who've read know what I'm talking about. But it's just a matter of having fun with it. But I think people just get a little too caught up with worrying about the canon of the original. It's something that you should think about as a writer, but the moment it starts controlling you, it's getting a bit too serious business at that point. Writing should be fun.
It should be, yes. Let's see here. I can't really smoothly transition into a different topic, but all right, I'll say
Oh,
this.
you just say we've got from this survey, we've got different subjects, and we're just going to move on to the next one.
I've got a lot of subjects here. I would like to admit that I haven't read very far in Murky Number 7. I have read
Either.
some of it. I remember explicitly reading up until the point where Murky had to go into the pit and he witnesses little Pip do her thing and he becomes enraptured with her and obsessed with her. Would you say Murky becomes sort of obsessed with little Pip in the pit?
Well, you feel very related to him in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that sounds like a very diplomatic way of saying I read a bit of chapter 1.
No, I'm pretty sure I got to chapter 2 as well. I'm pretty sure, or not, because the chapters in the beginning are ridiculously long.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of them as separate stories in a way, but that's a topic I could go on about separately. Part of the story, a major part of the story, I should say, not even just a part of it, a major part of it is essentially about Murky growing up, and that's something that I think a lot of people have been really saying lately. They've been finding quite satisfying. Now they're seeing what he's like towards the end, in that it's ostensibly a story about him growing up and realizing who he is and starting to become a bit more mature of a character as the story goes on until he becomes more than he was before. And at that point, at the start of the story, he was in dire need of something to believe in. He was in need of something that he could grip onto, that he could have a bit of faith in, something that he could look up to.
Mm-hmm.
And that just came at the absolute right moment for him, to give him a little bit of hope more. And those of you who read further into the story will know the absolute meaning of when I say the word hope and why that matters to him. And as the story goes on, it's worthwhile that enough people know it that I can say this out, that as the story goes on, he gradually begins to not need that belief in her as much. Be it that some of his conception, his preconceptions about her maybe get a little bit shattered by hearing realities. Maybe as he realizes that perhaps he's too far away from what she's doing, and he gradually learns to believe in himself more than believe in someone who's 100 miles away. And to believe it more in his friends and the people who are actually there for him. And that's part of his personal growth as a character. So that initial obsession is as a theme purely to set up the later developments.
And the only reason that I haven't read as far as I would like to is that in the beginning it is unrelentingly depressing and dark and morbid. And this is an important topic to address about grimdark and stories being too edgy.
Yeah.
Would you feel, would you want to rewrite how dark and depressing the beginning of Murky Number 7 is, or are you comfortable with it as it is right now?
I would rewrite it. This is kind of verging into one of the questions I saw somewhere when I was quickly looking at that document earlier, when someone asks, would I change it in any way? And yes, absolutely. That is one of the ones that I would change, because I knew from the start that I wanted to have it be quite a whiplash effect between despair and hope spots. And ultimately, I wanted those hope spots to matter more. However, at the start of the story, this was the first time I'd ever written it. Right? Oh my goodness, what happened? I know.
I thought you were an author, Fuzzy. I thought you knew
Scottish.
grammar. Okay, all right.
We
Like,
just make
that's
it up
any
as we go along.
excuse.
So, at the beginning of the story, I was a lot more inexperienced than I am now, and I essentially misjudged the balance of that, of how much down you need to up. And at the beginning of the story, across chapters 1, 2, and part of 3? 3's alright, I think, actually. But mostly 1 and 2. If I was going to rewrite, I'd probably just put them both into the same chapter and cut out quite a lot of those scenes. And that's predominantly just to try and get to those moments in chapter 3 where things start to get a little bit more optimistic with it. And with those original 2 chapters, yeah, I'd probably give a bit more for it. Originally, in my mind, it was about that some of the bits of humour throughout and his slightly snarkier attitude at that point was going to help see that through. Hindsight, it didn't. So, yeah, those first 2 chapters I feel could use quite a bit of rework, and maybe after I'm done, I'll go back and adjust a few things. I'm not going to make any sweeping changes like condense 2 chapters into 1, but there's maybe a few little scenes here and there throughout the first act of the story I'd want to remove. Picture perfect example. Chapter 9, there's a section where, in trying to get Rad away to help with his rad sickness, it spills on the ground after someone knocks out his hoofs. And the idea was that he was going to do, you remember in the cider episode where Dash eats the soil to get at the cider?
Of course,
and
yeah.
It's some kind of sick joke. I basically did that scene with Radaway, and originally in my mind it was going to be just a bit of a bit of black humor, and it was going to be quite amusing. Unfortunately, it just came off as really, really depressing. It never actually gained the humor part of it. So that's the exact sort of thing. I would just remove that small bit entirely, just to help smooth over some of that and make it less individual events constantly happening.
That can be the dividing point between it being dark humor and it just being grimdark. That's Let's say instead of cutting it out entirely, what do you think would help to make it actually come across as funny rather than just pathetic?
The surrounding scene, predominantly. Looking back on it, when I reread it, that entire sequence before it is a real low point. After it is a real worry, threatening point about got this harsh task to do that is going to be a bit dangerous. So that point in the middle there, it had no build to be funny.
No build, yeah.
So as a result, it just came off as another part of that. It didn't have the build up to be a point up. It just kept the mood down. It didn't have that. If it came in the middle of him maybe not in chapter 19 and maybe not getting a particular drink he wanted from the roamer again and again and again, and eventually came outside and one spilled on the floor and he tried to get it there, that might have been a bit funny. But
Yeah.
As it was, where it was, nah. It ended up not working. So
It comes across as you said, more depressing and just a bit awkward trying to insert humor into it's that emotional shift. You
exactly,
need to have
yeah.
that
It's far.
shift.
It was far too sudden.
Yeah. I was just watching the Nostalgia Chicks video on Hercules and how the massive problem with it is tone, where in the span of 30 seconds, there's some light-hearted action going on, and then it quickly switches to just bleak and depressing, and that's emotional whiplash,
Yeah,
is what it would be called. So,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you can do between that. That's why I chose that. You can do between hope and despair pretty well because going from it's all going to work to it hasn't worked, or going from it's never going to happen to it happened in another way, those are ones that can work. But like going from dark to sudden humor, or going from incredibly whimsical to suddenly horrific, certain combinations are just never going to work.
nah.
Which is strange, given that the very combination of My Little Pony and Follow is in itself something that should never have
Inherently,
worked.
yeah.
Yeah, it's still something I never quite grasp. Like I sometimes look at it and think, what the heck happened in my life? But things go where they do.
And how old were you when you started writing Murky Number Seven?
Gee, thanks. no, no, no. I started. Well, I can remember precisely when I was writing it because I started planning it when I was sitting in a hotel room in Leicester Square in London right before I was going to meet with Bethesda. Funnily enough, about a marketing contract. So yeah, that would have been because that was for Rage and Skyrim. So that would have been 2010, I think.
All right, so
Yeah, so that would have been 2010. So I
just
would
when
have been
MLP
about
started.
yeah, maybe yeah, maybe I just yeah, because yeah, it was because it was before FoE was done, and I remember FoE happened in the middle of season two. So it would have been it would have been just after it in that gap probably, but just maybe after the start of season. No, it was definitely before season two because I remember that when I went to Eurogamer. I remember I got to watch one of Discord's episodes, then I had to go back to England to do the convention down there. So yeah, it would have been after season one, but before season two is when it would have been. So I would have been about 24 at the time.
All right, so you were more into My Little Pony before Fallout Equestria.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And what initially drew you into My Little Pony to begin with?
Um, it's I believe the first thing I saw from it was a music video. I
A
think
fan-made music video?
yes, it was. I can't remember which one it was. No, I can't remember at all. But I saw the video, and I can't remember how, but I ended up going on Know Your Meme. I think it was back when that wasn't a terrible website, and I remember going there, and it explained My Little Pony in the most bizarre. And I always kind of remember the vague thing of how it said. It said it was a children's cartoon masquerading as subtly adult with massive underlying lesbian tendencies. Yeah, go figure. So, and it had a link to episode one right beneath it. So, what's any other person who's bored after a date uni going to do? They're going to click play. So, played it. Chapter one goes through. Sorry, not. Whoa, there's the writer coming out. Episode one goes through, and there's the two specific points that I remember kind of like made me think, oh, hang on, this is actually something a wee bit different. And the first thing, strangely enough, was a wee music sting. Right as Twi runs away from who we now know as Minuet at the start. There's this little guitar riff that plays there, and I heard that, and I don't know why, but that little guitar, it felt much more modern and energetic, and I was like, oh. That's a nice wee bit of soundtrack. That's quality making there. Oh, this could be intriguing. And then later on, it had the whole meet Fluttershy scene. I think a lot of people maybe feel the same. That this was the point where they really had a bit of an "oh my god, that's actually adorable" type reaction. And yeah, I think that was from there. I ended up still watching after that.
Guitar riffs and Fluttershy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Uh,
Yeah, just that's what built it all.
all right, fair enough. That's like a lot of people, for for the first episode that's make or break for them, and I can see Fluttershy being that. For me,
Mhm.
uh, I just I had Netflix at the time, and My Little Pony was a part of their plan. And I thought, you
Yeah.
know what? I'm just gonna give it a shot because I've heard so much about it. And I watched it, uh, seasons 1 and 2. I'm like, all right, I can see why people would like this. This is cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there wasn't. No, no. I would have to say it was the winter wrap up episode that really drew me in.
Oh yeah.
That's when it
Yeah.
clicked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been watching up to that point and having a couple of giggles, but that's probably the first episode that just really grabbed me. I'm a big musicals guy.
Oh
I
yeah,
do a
same
lot of
here.
I was doing a lot of theater back then, doing Rent and Aida and stuff. So as soon as that, I was like, oh wow, this is doing proper song sequences. Like,
Oh yeah.
oh, this is going to be good. And really, that was it. That was it, flying on from that point.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I think you mentioned back there about how it got to FOE after that.
Yes.
And
So what made you draw into Fallout Equestria after My Little Pony?
right, I had seen. I mean, that was back when everyone used Equestria Daily before it went spoiler happy,
Yeah.
and so I was looking through it, and every so often I would just see this. Well, now what I now know is a Steel Ranger, and it would just be this thing. It would go by, and it would go by maybe every few weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
And I never really thought a lot of it, and it would go by. I was Fallout Equestria, whatever. Wouldn't think anything of it. But at that point, I was involved in the Minecraft server Brohoof, where they made sort of a one-to-one scale replica of Equestria. And one of the most incredible things I've ever been a part of. Like, it was astonishing, being able to walk around. I mean, for goodness sake, they literally made every major town like one-to-one scale on a full world. Amazing. Anyway, I was in their Mumble channel speaking to a bunch of them while we're screwing around. I remember we were in the orchard building the clubhouse or something. And someone mentioned Fallout Equestria, and they went, "What? You don't read Fallout Equestria? What is that?" And I was like, "What? I've seen it. I've never heard anything of it." And they basically said, "No, you got to try it." And of course, as everyone's reaction is, "I don't know. That sounds kind of weird." But then there was the one thing that one of my friends there told me, and this line always stuck with me. He just said, "You were open-minded enough to try the show." Like, he's got a point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, went and tried it out, and in much the same way as I can say for episode 1 of Pony and the Parts That Grabbed Me, I know the exact word that grabbed me for FOE was reading through that intro and then the password CMC BFF something whatever. CMC3 BFF. That's
right,
what it
yes.
was. That password.
You
As
don't
soon as
know
I
your
saw that.
Fallout Equestria lore off the top of your head?
Spoiler: I
God.
haven't actually read the original ever since my first time through.
Only one time? There are people that have read it like 15 times.
Yeah, only once.
All right, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so that password, that was, and that password, at least I was already writing different things at that point. So I was kind of looking at it through a bit of writing eye at the time. And I saw that, and it immediately told me there's something more to this story than what's going on. The fact that it had, there up to this point, bear in mind, there's been no references to any characters that we know at this point of the
Yeah.
story. And then suddenly, CMC3 BFF, Curie Mark Crusaders 3 Best Friends Forever.
Right.
What is that? Why is that the password? What's going on here? Why are they referencing like that? What is the point? And that was just like, that was the moment that this story suddenly told me there's going to be secrets. There's going to be something you don't know yet, and it's got a plan. It's like the intro to Battlestar Galactica, and it always ended with, and they have a plan, at the end of it. That same sort of thing. So that was what made me want to really keep reading on from that first chapter.
It's been so long since I first read Fallout Equestria, and as I've said in the pilot episode, there were a lot of reasons to drop it, and I can't remember exactly if there was something specific about the story that caught my interest. I just knew that what I was reading was leagues above and beyond any other kind of fan fiction, because I've read quite a bit of fan fiction in my life, and I know,
Yeah.
based on reading the first chapter, whether it's going to be good or not. And really, Fallout Equestria doesn't really start with that first chapter. There is this foreword, and then a prologue, and then it goes into the story.
And even then, that story is essentially more of an intro.
Yeah.
So yeah, it certainly was an interesting start to it. But yeah, it's kind of odd that people do tend to either just go for it or they don't.
Yeah. I will say that I was really more initially drawn in by the fan art than anything else, and I too would see the Steel Ranger cover art on Equestria Daily when I first started Ponydom myself. Say, oh, okay, that's weird, and scroll past it and think nothing of it. And I'm not going to go too much into it because I've already talked about this in the first episode, but yeah, I just know that if anything, what really kept me reading Fallout Equestria was just the quality of it more than anything else.
Yeah, I think if I reread it, I'd maybe see some things differently, but it kept me reading, and it really got me invested in a lot of it. I mean, heck, I wouldn't be writing what I did if it would be literally a massive lie for me to say anything other than it really grabbed me. I would not have written what I did if it wasn't.
So Mercury number 7 is a direct inspiration from the story.
Not entirely. It's Mercury number 7 is sort of a hybrid in many ways. I'd had a story in my head for many years before Fallout Equestria or even Pony was a thing to me, actually. And I've always had that thought of a story of a very young, very afraid character trying to escape from somewhere that's hurting them. And that's been a theme throughout many of the earlier stories that I'd written before that point. And it always, for some reason, the theme of escape always seems to turn up in stories I write. And I've actually started to sort of embrace it a little bit. But that was always the one I wanted to tell. This horrific place which had a very innocent person trying to escape from it. And I always thought that could really get people to sympathize with a character. And I just never really had a medium. And I was working on my own thing. And in some ways, I actually still am. Even if it's in some ways similar, part of me likes to keep that original concept burning inside a little bit. Mm-hmm. Who knows down the line. But when I read this story and it got to Philadelphia, and I never really thought about it from the sense of Philadelphia. That never actually came until later. And I got enough through, and I started writing before the story was done. I remember that because part of the later chapters really scuppered one of my plans. So looking through the story at that point, I thought, I want to try writing one of these. I could write that. What about this story idea I had about this, quite innocent character escaping from somewhere that is not very nice at all. And that eventually built up into, it could be a story of a slave trying to escape from somewhere. I thought, what kind of slave place? I thought, I could make this place. And originally it was this sort of small town in a canyon that I had an idea for. A lot of underground areas. I believe it was even once suspected to be an earlier story in the timeline set around, what was it called? That place that had Deadeye in it.
Shattered Hoof Prison, I believe.
Yeah, that was it.
Yep.
I think I'd originally thought about maybe that, but then I was, I shouldn't use a place that actually existed in the story. That would be rude. Funny how that turned out.
Yeah.
And and I eventually had it myself. And then just one day I just thought, you know what? Why don't I use Philadelphia? Because my original story idea had this gigantic wall. Well, Philadelphia's got a big wall. Oh, well. Might as well go for it. And went for it. And then there was a very brief moment of panic because someone wrote a story. It never got past a chapter and a half. But someone wrote a story of someone trying to escape Philadelphia at that point. And I was, oh my God. Have I lost it at this point? But then they never continued past chapter 1 or anything.
That's sad to hear, but at the same time, thank goodness.
Yeah, it feels nasty of me to think it, but because that would have scuppered me completely if they had kept going, because they were actually pretty good as well. It was well written. So that never went there. So I went ahead with it, and that was how it came into Philadelphia, and. Ideas for the character and stuff being built up. It gradually came together. I've got notepads upon notepads of original ideas, and I intend to publish some of the earlier concepts. For example, like Murky's original name was Sunset Dreamer way back, until I didn't really like the name anymore. I didn't feel like it. It just felt like a pony name. It didn't have anything to grab people's attention with.
Yeah.
So that eventually morphed into something else. And funnily enough, it was actually at my mother's, and I was speaking to her about writing a story, not the exact nature of it, but was speaking to her about writing a story nonetheless. And I mentioned, yeah, I was thinking about writing a story, and I'm trying to think of like, how would someone name a slave? I had have this, names, and she just said, why? What if they just numbered them?
Ooh.
I was like, oh, there's an idea. So, mark number 1, number 2, number 3, number 7. Ooh, and that was it. Where is it? Yeah, I've got like a notepad here, and I've still got it here. I've literally just written Murky number 1, Murky number 2, Murky number 3, until I eventually found one that actually looked and sounded good, and that was where that came from. So,
And Murky
yeah.
number 7 just rolled off the tongue.
Yeah, pretty much. It rolls off the tongue nicely. It's got the whole lucky number 7 parallel. It worked really, really well. So that all just came together quite nicely from a variety of different sources and a couple of different iterations, which is partly why it took so long. And there was that was while I was promoting Skyrim, so I was literally spending a long time driving around doing visits for that campaign, and they'd given me an excerpt of the Skyrim soundtrack as part of the thing. So I had that
awesome. I'm
so
jealous.
I had that. So it was only like 3 or 4. It was a promotional thing. There's
Still,
thousands of them
that's
everywhere.
cool. That's cool that you personally got something like that.
Oh, well, so did the 10,000 other people who went to conventions. But okay, but it had
Sure, I think that's something to be proud of. But anyways, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm more proud of this that I'm wearing right now. Actually, if I'm going to talk about things I'm proud of from those days, I'm proud of my Vault Boy jacket pin that I got from them. That was the one there. I kept teasing them. I wanted their actual bobblehead, but they never quite allowed me near it enough.
Aww.
But yeah, like I was listening to the Skyrim soundtrack a lot, and a lot of the time it came up. I always ended up putting it back to the track "Streets of Whiterun."
Yes.
And that's a lot of the original stories kind of the original few chapters tones and its kind of quieter moments really came from, I think, in my mind, with that sort of very thin, very fragile sounding music, but with a real heart underneath it, was the way I thought of it at the time. So that was that was what inspired a lot of the original tones and themes going into it, was that exact track while I was driving around a lot.
So would you say that Murky Number 7 has a sort of soundtrack to it?
Oh, absolutely. I actually I don't know if it's still on my, let me check actually. I don't know if it's still on my hub page, but I for a time even had a thing up where I listed the different songs that I would listen to through different scenes to sort of get in the mindset of it. I wonder if it's still there. It is, yeah, it's still there.
I'll
link
be sure to link it, and I might even have the music playing in the background of this episode.
Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, I actually have it open for editing. People sometimes add their own ones to it that they feel suits what what they feel suits things going into it. Oh my goodness, people have actually added ones since. I've not looked at this in a wee while. I need to go back through this because it's always interesting to hear what other people hear when they do it. So I've had that up there, but yeah, I've got a lot of my own ones there. I think I stopped at around chapter 16, so it's way behind on the current stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff from I gave each track a story name, just to sort of link it to there, just so I knew what I was looking at for it. So, it's got the Dr. Dissonance's Fall of Equestria Overture. I've got the Streets of Whiterun, which I kind of in my mind to kind of get into it with the track, I had it down as The Lonely Slave. There was stuff from Cygoth. There was some stuff from Two Steps from Hell. I need to listen to that song again. It's been a wee while. There was even a few things from the Gurren Lagann soundtrack in there. Some of this very, very quiet, very emotional, but not emotional. I would say just very tranquil, quite heartfelt music in there, or even up to some other things from who was it? Like Captain Fluffaton. I actually just said that 'cause I wanted to say that name. Even something in there that was someone did for Past Sins. There was a lot of things in there taken from sort of Pony Fandom music, some stuff from soundtrack makers, some stuff from Daniel Yunt. People who have ever listened to the Yogscast probably heard some of his things. There's a good selection in there. So a lot of that to me was just ways to sort of get myself into the mood for a scene. I would specifically say, okay, it's this scene, right? This is the theme I've always had in my mind whenever I've been mentally planning this. So I'll put it on and get into the theme. And it's not even just with music. Like sometimes I'll use sound effect things. Like if I want to have just a fire burning in the background, if I want to have like for example, what I've been doing lately for these sequences in the Philadelphia War near the end was I straight up had excerpts from Afghanistan firefights, and like you can find like 10-hour versions of distant artillery sounds and stuff, and I would overlay them quite a lot to create an ambience to write with. And one of the things I heard back from was that people really liked the sense of onomatopoeia and sound coming out of the scenes from them, especially even from some serving members. So I would say it worked for me. Maybe it's something to consider for others if they hadn't before, because it actually makes it really immersive and fun to write with. It makes you feel a little bit more excited as though it's all coming together.
How do you feel about hyperlinking these sound effects and music directly in the story as like a part of a text or something?
Absolutely not.
No?
Absolutely not. I'm 100% against it. Yeah. I think that doing that could very easily sway someone's own interpretation of a scene in a way that I didn't want it to. That's not to say that I haven't had it happen in a story I've read a couple of times and it was amusing, but it always has this sense of fanfic about it when they do that. A book would never be able to do that, and no. I think it just creates too much of a sudden stop point, especially as almost anything that would be used would be not from the story itself, basically.
All right. To change tracks for a bit here, Dr. Ham in Wasteland Economics, when he was first writing that story, he had pretty much this one scene in particular in mind. It was the first scene he had ever formulated. And and it's actually in the most recent chapter he's uploaded as of this podcast, where Alloy comes across this painting. And he's pretty much been writing the whole story up until that point, and now most of the rest of the story for him is a blank slate. Did you ever have something similar for you in Murky Number 7 where you had this one particular scene in mind that you wanted to write to?
Yeah, loads of them. I absolutely loads of them. Part of the advantage to kind of connect this to the other point of having songs that you mentally associate with certain scenes is that you constantly think about them. Whenever you listen to that, you go through your playlist, you hear these songs, you mentally think about what you want to write, and it starts to build that sense of, I can't wait till I get to this scene. Practical reality is it usually ends up intimidating yourself whenever you realize you actually have to write it. But yeah, there's been a good bunch of them. I mean, from ones that have already came through, a lot of the kind of confrontations between Protege and Murky over time. The thing in chapter 18 where it's got the whole journey to the center of the mind type thing. There's a good number of sequences through that. There has been some of the big twists later on in the story that, of course, I knew about from chapter 1, so I've been waiting a long, long time to finally drop them down. There's a scene that in hindsight probably shouldn't have been in the story, but I can't bring myself to get rid of it because I enjoy it too much. In chapter 19, to do a certain scene involving a certain ministry mayor. I won't spoil it for those who haven't read it because it's a bit of a surprise. But those of you who've read the story probably know which one I'm talking about. And yeah, it does clash a little, but I just can't bring myself to get rid of it. I just enjoyed it too much. I'd thought about it too much, and I had a blast writing it. So I couldn't possibly get rid of it.
Do you remember the very first scene that came to your mind that you wanted to write? Like the first thing that popped in your mind, like, oh my god, this is what I want to write my story, and this is what I want to have in it.
I'm afraid I can't comment.
Spoilers?
Yep.
Okay, alright, fair enough. I understand.
Yeah, that's, given I've only got the finale to release, that should say something about how far in advance that scene was thought about.
Hey, speaking of the finale.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have one more chapter to write for Murky number 7, and then it's done.
What one and a bit released together. Yeah.
So, and this calls to mind the ending to the original Fallout Equestria and how many express feelings that they think it's rushed. Do you feel that the ending of the original story is rushed in any way?
Carefully picking words, I feel that the original's ending perhaps. It's an interesting way to sort of approach this because things get very easily misinterpreted if it's said the wrong way. Because what I think about the ending is that between 2 points is that it may have gotten a little bit crowded
Hmm.
and it may have ended in a portion that a lot of people didn't expect it to end within. Right up until almost at the finale, I was convinced that the finale was going to be the Gardens of Equestria being set off.
A lot.
I,
I
yeah,
know. I thought
so,
that as well.
but it was only really once they started talking about final stuff starting up in the story, I realized, hang on, they've not, they do, there's, and I was thinking again, thinking, I was thinking, there's not enough thematic space left in this story to find two other elements, and I was trying to figure out who it would be. And then I thought, no, there's no way that they could satisfyingly find other ones at this point. And that was and that's the point where I started thinking, oh, okay, this is going for a different ending then. And yeah, it went for one, and it set its objective, and it even expressively said its objective at one point, I remember. But I suppose the way I think is it just got a little bit crowded and a little bit deceptive in where it was going, and I don't think it was necessarily rushed in the sense that there was a lot of content in it, there was a lot of long chapters, and it fitted a lot of things in terms of time to end a lot of stuff, and every character got some sort of element that they were going to work with, literal or not. So I don't think rushed is maybe the right word.
Would you say bloated?
I think more just confused.
Confused.
I would say bloated implies the opposite, because I absolutely don't think that KCAP was aiming to rush through it so much as perhaps the scale of the ending became difficult to control, and I am experiencing the same thing with Marker Number 7. I think it was Cliff Blazinski actually at one point said that creating something is 30% passion at the start, 60% discipline the way through, and then 10% hell at the end. I think he said that about the original Gears of War, but that's exactly what I felt with it. And that last 10% is absolutely hellish to get through, and I wonder if it's maybe because of that, and maybe some symptoms of that the ending maybe got a little bit confused unto itself. But I wouldn't say rushed. I don't think rushed is the right term. I think that implies something about the writing process that isn't quite true.
Mm-hmm. And so you feel that for the ending of your story, you're also concerned about scale.
Absolutely, yeah. There's always this worry that when you've built things up and when people are expecting things to happen, that what you've got planned is never going to be enough, or that you may feel that despite feeling like it's not going to be big enough, that all the stuff contained within it is going to take far too long to get through, or worrying that, oh my god, I've got to get through this scene and this scene and this scene that all have to be done, but if I do them too quickly, people are going to not think of them as big and important, but if I do them too long, it's going to be bloated and massive. And balancing all that is hellish. It's absolutely hellish.
Absolutely.
And it's part of the reason why it's taking so long, because I feel like I'm second guessing myself in every sentence I write, and I'm having to take a long time to really look back over things and redo it and rebalance it, and then I'll go on and I'll write another scene and then realize what that's done to the overall pacing. So I've got to go back and rewrite the first one to build into it better, and it's becoming very interconnected, and it's all trying to play off and get things finalized. And honestly, the big lesson I actually found was it's very, very difficult to build yourself into not holding back anymore. when you're writing a long story, it's very easy to think, okay, I'll just hint at this because more's to come. You've just got to keep hinting. You've got to keep slowly giving the details, slowly giving the development over time to spread it out. But in this case, no, there's no such thing. You can't hold anything back. You've just got to shotgun it all at the reader. And you've got to get it all out there. You've got to go big, bombastic, no maybes, all absolutes. It's the finale. This is it. This is the end of things. So things have to end. They have to show everything they have left to show, basically. And it's very difficult to come around to that mindset and actually remember to do that all. So yeah, that's why I think finales are so hard, because they are just simply very freaking hard.
Yeah. So you don't want any questions to be left unanswered when Murky Number 7 is done. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say there's a slight difference from that.
Okay.
I mean, when I say show the whole hand, I mean that the story has to show everything it wants to show, and
okay.
set up everything it wants to have set up by the end. To leave that ending tone for it. I'm going to stop that sentence there, because that could that could. I don't want to end up sort of confirmation biasing the ending in the slightest.
I know you've sort of put yourself on your own. What's it called for video game? You put yourself on an embargo. You put yourself on a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah, pretty much. I live on those things with my job anyway. It just feels natural.
Yeah. So once Murky Number 7 is finally finished, what are your plans after that? Do you have any more writing to do, or do you think you're just going to be done with writing for a little bit?
Oh, always. I've got a lot of other things kind of running, both Fallout Equestria and not. For example, like I recently did a commission for the Rowan game, tabletop game that just kind of got kick-started recently. I just did a few pages of detail for it, but I've also been doing a wee short story that I did on the side at a point where I was just feeling murkied out, suffice to say, and I just needed to write something else, so I wrote a little backstory of a PNP character that I've been playing with. It's still based in Fallout Equestria. I didn't want to take my mind too far off the game, but I just wrote a little short story based around his origins for a while, and just had a bit of fun, got my mind off it, so tried writing a different character to then come back a bit fresher, which worked. It got me back into it. So I've been writing that, and there's a couple of people who've wanted me to maybe try writing some for their characters, perhaps as commissions. I don't know. I'm not going to say that word. It's going to imply things about me in a bad way until I actually want to talk about it. But I'm doing a couple of wee short stories based on some characters. There's another thing like that I've got in mind. There's a lost chapter of Murky Number 7 I kind of want to rewrite into something. It's not involving actual Murky stuff. I've talked about it before in my Tumblr, but it's something to do with the pre-war era, and kind of gives a bit of background to things that ended up then occurring in the later timeline of the Wasteland. So I kind of want to catch up on some of that and add that in and build that together and release that as a separate sort of spin-off from Murky, just giving a little bit more backstory on another past event.
For a very brief moment there, I think you may have dashed the hopes of people who finally wanted to see Murky and Protege bang.
Oh,
because at first I thought that's where you're going with the lost chapter.
Oh, the reason I'm laughing is different from the reason you're probably laughing. People who've read the story probably know why.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Unfortunately, no. In terms of the story as of where it's set now, no. This will be the end of that.
All right.
Yeah.
But it's not an absolute end to you writing Fallout Equestria stories in general. There may be more in the future after.
There may be more, yeah. I can't say anything as large as this, though. I mean, this is too large as it is. But no, definitely nothing more that size. I've already, like I said, maybe I'll have to post up that little short story I did at some point, just to give something to tide people over. And other ones I do. But I've got that wee kind of lost chapter to adapt. I had a bunch of other ideas that I would have really loved to write in a Fallout Equestria setting, but I doubt I'll get around to. Maybe part of me thought maybe I'd want to do it as a PNP for some of my friends instead. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know.
okay,
Um,
and I have heard, and we have sort of talked about this personally. I'm not sure if you want to
yes,
like
yes,
be public
yeah.
about it, but
I
yeah,
don't,
I
I
know what you're
can't
talking
really
about.
go public with it,
Yeah.
because yeah, but yeah, that was yeah, that's one that was in my head. There's other ones like, part of me really wanted to write an almost kind of British comedy series of a bunch of thieves in the wasteland. I don't know, just for a laugh. But I don't know. Maybe I'll never really get around to that. Maybe I'll do a couple of short things. I don't really know. But the ultimate goal is to maybe just do a few short stories and move on to something a bit more original, and try and make something out of that.
I want to rewind to something you brought up earlier about how a lot of what you've written always sort of revolves around this character in a bad situation and wanting to escape.
Yeah.
Have there ever been any actual pieces of media like video games, movies, anything like that that have sort of inspired or satisfied this itch for you for that particular sort of plot?
The closest that I can immediately say is An American Tail, the
Mm,
old Don Bluth animated movie,
yes.
and many people who watch it will almost immediately see some relevance to it. Fievel himself is just an adorable little squeakmeister. Whereas you've got this character in it that this wasn't actually intentional. It was only when I went back and rewatched it I went, oh my goodness! If I mention this movie, people are going to think I did this on purpose. There's this horrible rotten teeth slave master in it, who is trying to pull Fievel into his workhouse. And I was like, whoa, that's eerily familiar, and well, that's what it was. I suppose it's more meaningful than I thought it was looking back on it. But it was those types of movies from Don Bluth, that and Land Before Time, that sort of built that approach in my mind. I suppose that's that sort of innocence against darkness type thing that I found really interesting. And Escape is in many ways a certain theme that can often come with that sort of thing, in that you want to see them get away from these sort of bad things. In that case, you wanted them to find his family, and in Land Before Time, you wanted them to eventually find the rest. I think I haven't watched it in far too long, to find the rest of the dinosaurs or whatever they were journeying
Yeah,
for.
in that promised land, pretty much.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So stuff like that, that sort of eventual goal point through journey.
Are you a
So
big
yeah,
Don Bluth fan?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got so many of them here, and even down to, oh my god, I always mispronounce this, The Secret of Nim, or
Yeah,
Nymph, or whatever it is.
pronounced Secret
That
of
one.
Nim. Yes.
Yeah, that one. I've got that one there. All Dogs Go to Heaven. Just
Hmm.
I was always more Don Bluth than I was Disney growing up. And I think that explains quite a lot about the kind of tone a lot of my writing
Yeah.
became.
Oh yeah. And that does make sense because Don Bluth films always lent itself, while they were sort of aimed at children, they didn't hold back in their darker tones. Whereas
Oh
Disney
no.
was just like, oh yeah, pander to kids, sure.
Not always.
Not always, no, not
but
always, but
in
most of
many
the time.
cases, yeah. I mean, Disney could be pretty crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where a lot of it started, I think. And I mean, there were some other things. Like I grew up reading a lot of Enid Blyton novels, and there was a series in the Secrets series. Some people, I think, mostly only people in the UK maybe know what these are, but it's just some stories about a group of young kids. They were written in, I think, the 40s, so they're quite old stories, and the language and such like, and it represents that quite significantly. But it's like a group of kids that are living with their abusive step parents, I think, if I remember. It was like their aunt. Too long. But either way, they escape from them and go and live on a secret island instead. And the story is just about them living on that island. It's, very little actually really happens. But it's just about them getting away, and it's that sense of freedom and slight thrill that you feel reading through it as a kid. I think that sense of getting away from the danger grew from those stories, and they all very similarly have that theme of getting to a safe place.
How much would you die, or how excited would you be if someone, a fan, animated Murky Number 7 in the style of Don Bluth?
Oh my goodness, that would be insane. Not even just from like my reaction standpoint, but the idea of someone actually animating like that again alone. Having the time to sit down and really do that. Yeah, that would be incredible. I mean, anyone doing anything in that style again would blow my
Oh
mind at
yeah,
this
same
point.
here.
Not even just if it were murky. If it was, that would be something. Because that would that would be the sort of right. Okay, everyone else, I'm just going to pass out here for a moment. If you can please record this so that I might watch it again when I'm connected to a life support machine, I'll be very happy.
Would that be your ideal animation style for Murky? Is a Don Bluth?
Undoubtedly,
Yeah.
absolutely undoubtedly. If only for the environments that
Oh
he
yeah. Oh
creates.
yes.
Yeah.
That's personally what I loved about Don Bluth films were the backgrounds and the environments. They were so lively.
Yeah, it just they hit they, if there was one thing that was always better about than the Disney ones was Disney's ones were environments that looked nice and artistic. Don Bluth's ones actually supported the core themes and emotions of the story that it was showing. It hit the certain lighting tone, the color choices. It really made you feel the ambience. They had a lot more things going on in the foreground than a lot of Disney did, which was really what grabbed me. It had a good sense of 3D space going on. I'm sort of devolving into my computer animation student side a
No, that's
little
fine.
here,
That's fine. Like absolutely.
but yeah, but that's what stood out to me in a lot of them. That it really brought you into that world. It made you feel a sense of this lived-in area rather than everything being a bit too clean. Again, it feels disingenuous to try and imply Disney is not managing this stuff because Disney back then were freaking incredible, but that was a unique selling point of Don Bluth's environments that is very suiting to what I would imagine and would love to see, even just as a still art piece done of the sort of areas that I've written in.
Do you follow duo cartoonists at all?
No,
The
no,
MLP
I don't
fandom
really.
artists?
No, I don't know the name.
They were responsible for the animation Children of the Night a few years ago.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're recently working on another animation that is very reminiscent of the Don Bluth style.
I
Uh,
may have seen some screenshots that
yeah,
people link, but not certain.
and personally, I think it looks a lot like Children of Nim, where just the style in general, and this sort of theme, the visual theme. And I think that's something that you may be interested in, and I think you should check out because if Duo Cartoonist is bringing back that Don Bluth animation style, if only for like a 5 minute fan animation, that is
Oh, I would
just
love
like
it.
everything. All of that would be perfect. I
Yeah,
want to try to pull it up here.
yeah, it's honestly one of the big lost things like that. And yeah, I would love anything to do with that. Just grab it like straight away.
Yes.
It's just a big lost part of growing up type things, and then they always say, "Oh, things just change, don't necessarily the same." Well, I want that. I don't care. I'm going to be as childlike as I can be. I want that, not the rest.
So while we're on the topic of fan creations, Overmare Studios and their video game adaptation of Fallout Equestria, you work in the games industry.
Yeah,
Have
yeah,
you had a
I do.
chance to look at the demo or even play the demo that Overmare Studios put out?
Yeah, yeah, I played it. At least the first one. I hear they got a second one out. I haven't had a go at that one yet, but I played the first one, and I mean, the one downside of working in games QA is that you inevitably end up QA anything just through habit. But yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to see what they're doing, and the fact that they actually got a functioning build that has a bit of playtime in it, that has options in it, that has some form of rudimentary AI running in it. That alone is a bigger step than 99% of projects yet. And I've been quite intrigued following it. I suppose I should probably. I mean, I'm guessing you're sort of leading towards like how I feel about the project as such, from sort of an inside perspective,
Yeah.
like now. But I mean, the way I would put it is, do I think that this game will be finished? No. Do I think that this game is worth working on? Yes. And the reason for that is that what they've set themselves, based on what I've seen to create from that sort of thing, is horrifically impractical. And I'm certain that they'll be sitting there going, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Please do. You know, please do. I would love to be wrong in this. But I think it's impractical scale. I think the scope is far too large. However, at the same time, I love the fact that they're trying for it, because even if they get maybe nowhere near that and they never quite finish it, doing these mod projects is teaching these people a lot about project organization. It's teaching them about modeling, about programming. They're all learning a lot of stuff that they could take into future projects, and they're learning lessons and they're gaining talents that is going to be
Absolutely.
very, very handy. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people miss. The people who knock it down and say, oh, if you're never going to finish this, why are you bothering? They're bothering because they're learning. It's like doing an art piece. Nobody starts out drawing great. I'd quote Aaron Hansen's amazing quote about coming out drawing well, but I don't. I would feel horrible even saying some of the language he uses. But the yeah, I mean, people get better through trying, and they've set themselves, hey, let's try and do something stupidly large, and then maybe at the end of it, if they get it done and it's an absolute miracle, wow, they'll have accomplished a miracle. But if chances are more likely they eventually sort of just put her out, they'll have learned some valuable lessons through that, that when they next do their thing, and if they're passionate enough to get this far, they're passionate enough to do something else, they will take those lessons into that and they will become better game developers for it. That they will have learned so much through it, and chances are they'll have enjoyed it, they'll have gotten a bit of attention to themselves, and they'll be putting out a finished prototype that they can at least say, look, we've got to this stage, how do we improve on this? They'll know how to get to that faster next time. Nobody in the games industry creates whole things first time. Nobody in the games industry gets where they are without having learned lessons through things that maybe didn't work, that they maybe even knew wouldn't work. They've got to take that chance and push for it, and these guys have tried to push for it. So
Yeah.
I absolutely wish them well with it, and I think that there's a lot that they can get from it. Based on what I saw, I mean, yeah, it's janky as hell right now. It's an alpha. What else is to be expected? However, I can say that it ran easier on the machine than a AAA title did at a similar point of development we had.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so they've got, they're doing something right there if they can, if they can get to that sort of stage with the running performance.
Absolutely. And the same thing can be said for writers, because you don't necessarily need to have a certain skill level to start writing, because as you said, no one starts off great. You have to start off at the very basic. And when you start off, you're going to be shit. There's no denying that. You're going to start off writing terribly, but you have to be able to learn from what you wrote and move on from there.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to accept that there's going to be a lot to learn. It's going to be a very steep learning curve for you,
Yep.
and it's going to take a long time before you can get to that level of being a decent author.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I always like put it, like I said, I've done a couple of con workshops, and in both of them, there's a lot of kids coming into it. And to get them into writing, it's very much one of the things I say to them is when you say to the people, put your hand up if you've ever written anything. Some people will put their hands up. Tell them, put your hand up if you'd like to write something. More of them will put their hands up. Some of them will be a wee bit unsure. And you say to them, put your hand up if you've got a story you would love to write. Everyone puts their hands up.
Hmm.
Everyone. And if they don't put their hands up, they're a bleeding liar. Because nobody goes through life who doesn't have a story they want to tell in some way or another. Everyone's got at least one story in them that is worth telling. So if people want to get into writing, then just go out, write. Try something quite small. I mean, one of the big mistakes is people try to shoot a little too high, run out of the feeling that they can do it, hit the brick wall, get frustrated, and never do it again. Start with something that they can do. Just do like a little page story, like a little excerpt from something. Then try doing a few pages of a story, tell a little 3-act structure, then do a short story, do a couple of chapters for something, then maybe try something a wee bit better. Build up, get a sense of completing things. Get that achievement feeling in your head, like, wow, I've finished that. Put it out there, get some feedback. Like, love, hate, whatever, doesn't matter. Put something else out there. Get used to the idea of getting to the end of things, and that's how you build towards doing bigger things. I fell out of writing for years at one point, and that's what got me back into it. I did steadily larger stories, culminating in a 40-page short story before I leapt back into doing Murky. Leapt into doing Murky at all, actually. I need to repost that because I tried to get used to writing ponies, so I did a little season episode style story at one point. I maybe
Yeah,
need to repost that somewhere.
nice.
It's probably written terribly, but I like writing humor. So,
Oh, hey, speaking of which, would you ever consider doing a non-faux NLP fan fiction?
oh yeah, yeah, I quite enjoy doing humor that's ostensibly safe for work. I really enjoy doing very whimsical things that have those restrictions on them. I like doing a lot of writing exercises where I say, right, in this I cannot do this, or I have to work within these restrictions. Like for doing that one, I tried to tell myself, right, what if Hasbro was looking at this? I have to make sure that it fits within. It has to have the lesson. It has to have the structure. It has to have these restrictions. I can't have the characters say this. I can't have the characters do that. I can't have them think this. I can't have this type of humor that wouldn't even get into the show. And then season 5 happened and threw that idea out the window. But yeah, and that's how I built up. And I love having those restrictions with it. I had to look at all the humor and tell myself, right, I have to make this humor without using any form of outrage humor or any form of adult humor, which, when you really think about it, is what 95% of humor that adults use is.
Yes.
And and having to put restrictions on, I found that challenge to come up with really safe little fun jokes that were still funny, quite fun. And I would really love to do that again. Maybe I would do another one for it. I had two that I wanted to do, and then season 5 actually did one of them, and nobody believes me that I came up with it first.
So what was it?
It was the Spike has to take care of the pets, or was that season 4? That was season 4.
That was
Sorry.
season 4, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Spike has to take care of the pets. Granted, I mean, look, I'm not going to go out and say I'm the only person that ever had that idea. It's not an exactly rare concept, but the fact that I wanted to do that and then the show actually did it, that was kind of like, oh, well, fine. I'll just do something else then, or something. So, yeah, I would probably do something like that, but I would probably stick very, very show style because I really enjoy working within those boundaries.